using then, Matt, was of course the famous, infamous sharpshooter, which of course is a big significance to Bret Hart. And not many guys, especially in WWF, were using a submission as the finisher, like would really do the job. So Bret again was probably one of the few guys that in that period that would have been using it. But this is how it all come about. This is from Bret's book, so I'm just going to read a passage from it right now. And this is basically in April time of 91, where Pat Patterson asked me if I knew how to put on a Scorpion Deathlock. I told him no, but that I could figure it out. So I went in search of a wrestler who could show me. The only one I could think of was a Mexican named, of all people, Matt Conan, which I had no idea until I read this at the time. As I lay on my back, he held the heels of my boots in his hands to do it, and threaded his leg between mine, stepped over me while crossing my legs, and jammed one of my feet under his armpit, all the while twisting me over like a Boston crab. This move looked great, but was a total work in that it was a damn near impossible to put on somebody unless he let you do it. Matt, for you, the sharpshooter, the whole thing, how big of a deal is that finisher? Because I know, what kind of, I guess I get a little bit kind of narky when I see people, they kind of like, they just sort of put it on like nobody's business. And I think one of the first guys I remember doing it was The Rock, and I was like, that doesn't even look right now. And I know that Sting was using his own version, but I never had a problem with that. Even though it's pretty much the same, I just felt like they were the same era. But when I see guys after Bret had sort of retired, and I see him just putting it on, and it really, it didn't have people tapping out or anything, it kind of bothered me. But back in the day, Matt, the sharpshooter was quite a big, significant thing for Bret, and people, it's odd, isn't it, Matt? Because I know that the figure four leg lock gets that huge reaction, but there's not many sort of submission moves for a finisher that people get too excited about. But I was definitely excited every time he was going to, apply the sharpshooter. How good for you was the sharpshooter, and how Bret applied it in his craft through his career?
Oh, it was the perfect submission for him, and in fact the perfect finisher full stop for him. And I remember watching countless matches of him where he would just lift the guy's legs, and I'm thinking, this is the moment where he would just stamp on their gut, and it'd be like, he's working him, he's working him over, he's making him susceptible to the tap out, he's not going to give it to us straight away. But yeah, everything about this move was just perfect for him. The fact that they got the name right, the sharpshooter, and being the Hitman works perfectly, and the sharpshooting pain, great with that. But then also, just the fact that he's a good guy, or he was most of his career, and the fact that he applies a submission to people, and you get to see, the person that he's been feuding with, and who's supposed to be the bad guy, they actually have to physically tap out to him, It just made his victories that much more satisfying to see.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, of course, it was around this time as well when he's been told that by Pat. And I guess, he's now going to become, obviously, the solo wrestler. He knows the team of him and, Jim is gone, and he's going to go his own way. So, I guess, I mean, when you listen to Bret and, you watch back his DVD, I don't think he ever really imagined he'd be anything more than the mid-card guy at that time, particularly when you consider the roster around him and the way the WWF was performing its main events. He didn't really have that room for those kind of technical guys and the sort of chemistry wrestlers that we would become accustomed to. But whilst this was going on in April, there was a tour which was a regular tour in Japan, which would take place rather than going to the UK straight after WrestleMania. It was always Japan that they would hit up. And Bret, from his book, would say that whilst he was in Japan, before a match, before Hogan went out to a match, he asked me what Vince was going to do with me. I considered Terry, that's Hulk Hogan for everybody that doesn't know, Hogan and Terry are the same guy, by the way, after all that court case business. I considered Terry as a friend, so I told him where I stood. I was surprised to hear him say, with a hurt look on his face, that Vince was trying to bring him down. His WWF deal was up soon, and he told me that Ted Turner's WCW was interested in him. It was easy for me to see that Terry liked his ovation that night, because it showed Vince that Hogan could always go back, no matter what, and obviously get that huge reaction. So, Matt, at this time, I mean, this is very interesting because this is a transitional period where Hogan is, he's not, I mean, this is post WrestleMania 7, so he's not quite done yet, but he's done the whole thing with, he would have had the match with Sergeant Slaughter, and I guess maybe he was looking for an out, but it's very interesting in this transition between Hogan and Bret in this, and just to hear that they had that conversation this early on, especially of what we know now, obviously, is very interesting to see how things developed after that. But Matt, at that time, I mean, I guess as we were kids, Hulk Hogan was the guy. He was the guy that was, of course, the big draw, and all the rest of it. He'd sort of survived Ultimate Warrior through all this, and still come back as the guy. How big of a draw is Hulk Hogan, Matt? And do we nowadays underestimate just how big he was back then in terms of his success and his run?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do to a certain degree, because although now we have our John Cena's, who have had careers that have spanned, like quite over a decade, that you just don't underestimate how much drawing power Hogan had. He was a household name. He was on everything. And even as a kid, before I knew wrestling, I knew Hulk Hogan. I saw that face around. I didn't even see a wrestling match, but I knew who Hulk Hogan was as a kid. It wasn't until I was about 6 years old, and then I seen a wrestling match, and then I was like, okay, so that's what Hulk Hogan does in the ring, and that's why he's famous. But I had seen him around in toys and everything. I had toys of him. Didn't know just like what wrestling was before I'd even had the toys. Just how much he was there. And just like you said about that time, about it being a transition, and going through the old Ultimate Warrior kind of saga where they were like looking like they were teasing the passing of the torch, but it just didn't pan out. That was gonna, if anything had happened to Hulk Hogan at that time and he left WWE, that was gonna always leave an enormous void. Sure.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I felt like we should be mentioning Hogan because of just that he was the king of the hill, if you will. He is the king of the mountain at that time. He's arguably WWF's biggest draw, and the success he's had. I mean, him and Vince McMahon are taking this conglomerate of WWF to places and heights that in the span of at this point, just under 7 years, WrestleMania has become massively iconic. It's become huge today, of course, but when you consider the speed of it, it's quite impressive. I mean, there's no doubt about it that those two single-handedly pretty much took it on their back and run with it hard. So, for whatever we may criticise Hogan's wrestling ability, I don't think you can ever take away star power. Another part from the book here, and I want to bring us up now. We're going to get into May here. But this is interesting because, again, it shows you how things were booked back then, Matt, when you hear this. And this comes from Bret's book again. And he says that Vince had one more jerk around in store for me. In May, he announced that he'd changed his mind and was putting me back in with Jim. 3 weeks later, after much worry on my part, I was summoned to see Vince at the TV tapings at the time. where he did another about face. I'd be taking the Intercontinental belt from Kurt at SummerSlam, i.e. Mr. Perfect at Madison Square Garden. Just like I'd figured out back in April, I remembered that day in 1979 when Hito told me Vince McMahon said I didn't have a big enough name to wrestle in Madison Square Garden. As I left Vince's office, I felt a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. The Intercontinental title belt was the first step in a far-off dream of being the WWF World Champion. So, Matt, it was obviously penciled in that Vince maybe did have some plan for him here, that this was going to, be his sort of first step. But, yeah, it's interesting when you hear that story, and, it must have been, like you said, massively rewarding, considering when he did first get to the WWF, back in 1979, and he tried to, he was going to be showing up for Madison Square Garden, but he got told he couldn't go on because he didn't have a big enough name. To finally get an opportunity now, Matt, at SummerSlam against Kurt Hennig, i.e. Mr. Perfect, for the Intercontinental belt is it's got to be pretty rewarding after all the sort of downgrades, I guess, he got at the very early stages of his career in WWF.
Yeah, and I mean, at that stage as well, you should be really excited when someone says that you're going to actually hold the Intercontinental title, because back then it was really a huge stepping stone.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people back then saw that winning the IC title meant that, they were going to be putting on some of the best matches of the night, which, of course, that consistently happened a lot of the time because the heavyweight champions were often, such of a heavy weight that they were actually didn't have the stamina to go. But IC title people, they were just going and stealing the show most of the time. But not only that, you also had that sense of progression. That the next step from the IC title is that you will in a couple of years maybe perhaps qualify to actually go for the heavyweight title, which was quite often the case. And I think Bret Hart was one of the people that made that a mainstay. He made that transition, and after that we'd get people we'd get Triple H getting the IC title and then getting the heavyweight title. We'd see people like Austin and all that other stuff, and then Jeff Hardy and all that. It would just become a snowball effect, and I think Bret Hart was one of the originators to thank for that. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, the Intercontinental belt in the WWF was really worn with pride. I mean, even going back before that, I'm going to say that, the likes of Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage at WrestleMania 3, that match was for the Intercontinental belt. I mean, that stood out probably as the best match of the night. But you had, even the Ultimate Warrior won the Intercontinental belt. I mean, God, he won it. He won the belt whilst he still had that belt. So that shows you how big the Intercontinental title was back then, to where it is now, of course. Pretty dire, but it was a big deal. It means you are really have some worth. I don't think back then, Matt, they used it as a tool to sort of. It wasn't, the belt wasn't making you. You had to make the belt. It wasn't the other way round. You didn't just stick the strap on somebody to try and help their career further, like it kind of gets to nowadays. It's more about the other way round back then, and you really had to back it up and bring something to it, and I think that's what it was about. But Mr. Perfect at the time, Matt, I mean, we've got to mention him here because, of course, he plays quite a big role in Bret's career, but those two, I mean, very, very similar in many respects, both second generation stars, but the size wise and everything like that, these two, you've got to say, Matt, he's probably up there as being a match made in heaven, isn't he, with Mr. Perfect?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of two guys back then, and I think of the styles and technical being the exciting thing of the time, they were both on top of their game.
Sure.
And, I've never seen a bad match between them two, and in fact, it's pretty hard to find a bad match between any opponent they've had. Even when Mr. Perfect was coming to the end of his kind of time in WWE,
and he had still
tremendous performance, he still put on 5-star performances.
Yeah, definitely did. I mean, he was an incredible performer. There was no doubt about it, Mr. Perfect. And The one thing I'll say about him as well, I enjoyed his gimmick. I mean, I thought he was hilarious. I thought he was, he's definitely one of